James Harper was the man everyone admired, Linda Harper was the woman everyone trusted, and their children Sarah and Daniel were the ones every parent pointed to with pride. But within days, this seemingly perfect family would transform from a portrait of respectability into the center of one of Millfield's darkest crimes, where love, fear, and rage collided in a way no one saw coming. The town of Millfield was the kind of place where neighbors left their doors unlocked, children played in the streets without fear, and gossip traveled faster than the evening news. People trusted each other, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. Everyone seemed to know one another, and new events, no matter how small, became the talk of the town for weeks. It was in this quiet setting that the Harper family lived, and to anyone on the outside, they appeared to be the embodiment of perfection. James Harper was a respected businessman who wore his success like a badge of honor. His wife Linda was known for her involvement in the church and community charities, always lending a hand whenever someone needed it. Their two children, Sarah and Daniel, were well-mannered, polite, and excelled at school. To neighbors, the Harpers seemed untouchable, the kind of family people pointed to as an example of how life should be lived. But perfection has a way of creating shadows, and within the Harper household, those shadows ran deep. At first, it was little things that drew whispers from the community. Some evenings, muffled arguments could be heard from behind their walls. Other times, Linda appeared at church looking tired, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. James's once thriving business had begun to falter, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and frustrated clients. His temper, once hidden, grew shorter with every setback. For a man who built his reputation on control and success, the cracks in his world became impossible to ignore. Still, the family played their parts well. At public gatherings, they smiled, posed for photos, and insisted that everything was fine. Linda made sure the children never spoke of what happened at home. And James maintained his polished image by boasting about opportunities that never truly existed. Even Sarah and Daniel, though still young, understood the unspoken rule of silence. To the outside world, the Harpers were flawless, but within their home, tension thickened like storm clouds ready to break. Neighbors who once admired the family began to notice the shift in energy around them. Some said the Harpers carried a heaviness, as though each smile was rehearsed and every word was carefully chosen. Others insisted they were simply under stress like anyone else, dismissing the rumors as exaggerations. Yet the truth was darker than anyone could imagine. What no one knew then was that the Harper family's carefully crafted facade was about to collapse in a way that would shock Millfield forever. The evening of March 14th began like many others in Millfield, with a community dinner hosted at the local hall. These gatherings were cherished traditions where families came together to share food, exchange stories, and celebrate their tight-knit bonds. When the Harpers arrived, people took notice immediately. They looked unusually quiet, as though weighed down by something unspoken. James kept his gaze fixed on the floor, Linda wore a distant expression, and Sarah and Daniel sat stiffly at their table. Their silence stood out among the usual chatter and laughter that filled the room. Some neighbors assumed the family was simply tired, but others couldn't shake the strange air that seemed to follow them. As the evening progressed, that quiet reserve suddenly shattered. Almost without warning, the Harpers shifted from being withdrawn to behaving with an intensity that unsettled the crowd. James, who had barely spoken earlier, began cracking jokes loudly, drawing attention to himself in a way that felt forced. Linda, normally composed and graceful, laughed in a high-pitched tone that carried across the room, her energy bordering on manic. Even the children seemed to transform, no longer sitting quietly but interrupting conversations and speaking with unusual excitement. It was as if the family's demeanor had swung violently from one extreme to the other, leaving everyone around them confused. The change was so abrupt that people whispered among themselves, questioning what could have sparked it. Some thought perhaps the Harpers had received good news and were celebrating. Others suspected alcohol might have been involved, though no one had seen them drink more than a glass or two. To those paying close attention, the behavior felt less like joy and more like desperation, as though they were trying to distract themselves or others from something heavy lingering just beneath the surface. By the end of the dinner, the Harpers had become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Their laughter rang hollow, their smiles appeared strained, and their sudden enthusiasm left an uneasy impression on those who witnessed it. When they left the hall, several people remarked that the family seemed almost relieved to be stepping away from watchful eyes. No one realized at the time that this dramatic swing in attitude was not just a passing mood, but a sign of something far more dangerous brewing behind closed doors. Hours later, Millfield would wake to the devastating consequences of that night. Just after midnight, the Harper home, usually dark and quiet, became the setting for a chain of events that would forever stain Millfield's memory. At 1:42 a.m., a frantic 911 call came through from the residence. The voice on the other end was panicked, but before any details could be given, the line abruptly went dead. Dispatchers tried to call back, but there was no answer. Within minutes, police cars sped through the sleepy streets, their sirens breaking the silence of the night. When officers arrived, the house appeared locked and undisturbed from the outside. Curtains were drawn, and a faint light glowed from inside, flickering as though something had knocked the lamp off balance. After repeated knocks went unanswered, the decision was made to force entry. The moment the front door was breached, the smell of iron hit them, a sharp, unmistakable reminder that blood had been spilled. The once orderly living room was in complete disarray. Furniture was overturned, shattered glass crunched under boots, and streaks of blood marked the walls and floor. In the center of the chaos lay James Harper. His body bore the signs of a violent struggle, deep wounds, bruises, and injuries far too brutal to suggest anything but rage behind the attack. The scene made it clear he had fought desperately before being overpowered. Yet what unsettled officers even more was the absence of Linda, Sarah, and Daniel. There was no trace of them except for a disturbing trail of blood, leading from the living room toward the back of the house and out into the yard. The trail suggested at least one other person had been seriously injured. What puzzled investigators was what had not been touched. Expensive electronics sat undisturbed, wallets and jewelry were left behind, and the front door had been locked from the inside. Nothing pointed to a robbery. Everything about the crime suggested it came from within, the eruption of long-suppressed tensions. The shift the Harpers displayed at the dinner hours earlier now seemed like a warning sign overlooked by everyone who witnessed it. By dawn, the Harper home was sealed off with police tape, and officers fanned out across Millfield, searching for Linda and the children. The question on everyone's mind was chilling. Had they been victims who fled in fear, or were they the very perpetrators of the violence that ended James Harper's life? The search for Linda and the children stretched into days, turning the peaceful town of Millfield into a place buzzing with fear and speculation. Posters with their faces appeared on storefronts, and neighbors whispered about possible motives. Police combed nearby woods, questioned relatives, and followed every lead, but the family seemed to have vanished. Just as theories began to spiral, a breakthrough came from an unexpected tip. A local farmer reported seeing a woman and 2 children near a cabin on the outskirts of town, a property belonging to Linda's cousin. Authorities moved quickly, surrounding the isolated structure with caution. When officers entered the cabin, the sight inside was chilling in its calmness. Linda sat at a wooden table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as though she had been expecting them. Across from her, Sarah and Daniel huddled together, pale and visibly shaken, their eyes avoiding everyone in the room. The cabin was sparse, with only a few essentials scattered about, but what caught investigators' attention most was the blood-stained clothing stuffed hastily into a bag near the door. It was clear the family had been living there in hiding since the night of James's death. During interrogation, Linda finally broke her silence. She painted a picture of years of hidden torment, claiming James had controlled every aspect of their lives, isolating them and using violence to maintain power. She insisted that on the night of the dinner, after they returned home, his anger escalated into something unbearable. According to her, the fight that erupted in the living room was not planned, but was the breaking point of years of fear. The children, she said, acted only to protect her when James became violent. But detectives were unconvinced by the simplicity of her account. The autopsy on James revealed wounds far more severe than what would be expected in a moment of self-defense. Evidence suggested multiple weapons had been used, and the sheer force behind the attack hinted at something deeper, uncontrolled rage rather than a single act of protection. Investigators began to suspect that the violence had not been a spontaneous outburst, but a coordinated act fueled by years of suppressed emotions. The discovery of the family in the cabin brought relief to a town desperate for answers, but it also raised more questions than it solved. Were Linda and her children victims who finally snapped under years of abuse? Or had they crossed a line into something darker, taking justice into their own hands. The line between survival and vengeance had never seemed so blurred. The trial of Linda Harper quickly became the most talked about event in Millfield's history, drawing reporters from neighboring towns and filling the courthouse with anxious spectators. From the very beginning, the case was marked by a tense clash between two conflicting stories. The prosecution argued that Linda had long harbored resentment toward her husband and on the night of his death, used her children as accomplices in carrying out a brutal attack. They pointed to the extent of James's injuries, the multiple weapons involved, and the blood evidence as proof that this was not a moment of panic, but an eruption of calculated fury. The image of a family acting together in violence left the courtroom stunned, and many wondered whether the Harpers had been hiding something far darker than anyone had realized. The defense, however, painted a very different picture. They described James as a man who wore a mask of respectability in public while unleashing cruelty in private. Witnesses came forward who recalled Linda's strained demeanor at church and the children's nervous behavior around their father. Expert testimony about patterns of abuse supported the claim that the family had lived in constant fear, their lives controlled by James's unpredictable temper. According to the defense, the night of his death was not an organized plan, but a chaotic explosion of survival instincts after years of torment. As the trial progressed, the town of Millfield became divided. Some residents believed Linda's story wholeheartedly, insisting no one could understand the private horrors she had endured. Others felt the evidence told a different truth, one where anger and vengeance had overtaken reason. The children's testimonies added to the complexity. They described their father's violence, but their words also hinted at encouragement from their mother during the attack. Their conflicting emotions, fear, loyalty, and guilt were laid bare for the world to dissect. When the jury finally delivered its decision, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy with anticipation. Linda was convicted of second-degree murder, her calm expression breaking only slightly as the verdict was read. Sarah and Daniel, too young to fully grasp the weight of their actions, were sentenced to juvenile rehabilitation centers rather than prison. The outcome left the community stunned, caught between sympathy and condemnation. The Harper case became a chilling reminder that behind the walls of even the most admired families, darkness can grow unchecked. A sudden shift in attitude, from restraint to violence, had torn apart not just a household, but the very fabric of trust in Millfield. It was proof that perfection is often a mask, and sometimes, the mask hides a storm waiting to break.